أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وآله الطاهرين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الحميد وقوله الحق أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قال ربنا الذي أعطى كل شيء خلقه ثم هدى. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we'll continue our discussion by providing Islamic perspectives on modern day issues. The topic today is a topic that does cause a considerable amount of confusion amongst our youth and also amongst our elders to some extent. We mix quite often cultural baggage with Islamic teachings and with modern sort of viewpoints, and end up with an understanding of this topic which is totally, or which could be described as being totally alien to the true teachings of the Holy Ahl Bayt. And that is the topic of freedom. It's a very popular word. It's a word that's repeated over and over again in a lot of different contexts. Teenage children to their parents, no, we're free to choose, we can do whatever we want. Even younger children nowadays have started saying that. Societal level demonstrations and protests, we want this changes to be made to the community. And politically across the globe, you can see what's going on in Hong Kong in terms of people protesting for freedom. We saw the Arab uprising, which was based on the notion of getting freedom for the society out there. Before we go into an in-depth discussion on this topic, what I'd like to do is give you a background and give you a theological, almost an academic backdrop to where the discussion within Islam lies. When did it first occur? When did this discussion first occur amongst the Muslim scholars, and where those views are today? And then go on to present the teachings of the Holy Ahl Bayt, and to make sure that we dispel some of the common misconceptions that we have in our community. So the questions we're going to have: are we free? Have our lives been predetermined? Which is, I think, where most of us get confused. What part of our lives are predetermined? What is our role? If God has made all of this, has put us here, and He is the one who's controlling everything, what is our role in this? And what is God's role in this? So that creates a lot of confusion. And as I said, Islamic theologians discussed a lot of these topics immediately after the Prophet's time, in particular in the time of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam. And there was a considerable debate. There were two key camps. One was called the Mu'tazilites and the other was called the Ash'arites. These are within the Sunni school. The Ash'arites held the view that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created everything and had left people, you and me, to do whatever we wanted. So He created everything and left us to do whatever we wanted. Okay. Now, there was a political angle to this at the time because they were using this to justify Bani Umayyah. They were using this to justify Yazid. They were saying the events of Karbala are not the fault of Yazid. They'd all been predestined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yazid was just the agent fulfilling what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had predestined. So therefore Yazid could not be held responsible. They were justifying the actions of the Khalifs. The Khalifs, especially Bani Umayyah, they had been there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted them and given them the power over us, and it's not for us to demand any rights back and to demand change. That is God's will. That is God's predestination, predetermined predestination. So therefore, we cannot challenge that status quo. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the world, has left us in that world, and has left us in that world to do whatever, has put us in this world and has predetermined the future. So we can't challenge that. He has put Bani Umayyah as the Khalifs of the time, as the rulers of the time. Who are you and I to challenge them? Yazid was not responsible for the events of Karbala. They had been predetermined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they would happen. So therefore, he could not. They were trying to find an excuse to get the leadership off the hook. The other view, the Mu'tazilite view, was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created the world, but then had left us with free will to do as we wanted. We were free to choose whatever path we wanted. We were free to make whatever changes we wanted. We did not require God's intervention, and God doesn't intervene in day-to-day activities for human beings. It's a very complex issue, and I'm trying to summarize as best I can. And if there are any questions, happy to take them. If you could get in touch with me directly. Now, the Shia viewpoint, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on this because I think, as I said, I think what's happened is, especially most of us from the Indian subcontinent have come with an Indian mindset, with a Hindu cultural mindset. And we always think that everything is predetermined, predestined. Relationships are written in the skies. We were destined to marry this person. We were destined to have this many children. We're destined to have this. We're destined to. There's a lot of kismet, as we say in our community. There's a lot of. It's in this kismet, right? We use that word a lot in our community. I'm sure it's in other Shia communities, but in particular in our community, I find that. And as I said, I've known it's not just with the youth, but I also find it with our elders. They have this notion that whatever is predestined is predestined. And a lot of the things in our lives are predestined. And there's nothing you and I can do about it. Now, the view the view of the Holy Ahlul Bayt and the Holy Imams is that it's neither one extreme or the other. Neither is a jabr in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forced us, nor is it tafawud in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just left us. So neither jabr nor tafawud. Jabr, you're compelled. This is it. This is what's going to happen. You're going to do it. You're just an agent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pulling all the strings, effectively. Okay? So neither of those two views the Imams have accepted. And they said the truth is somewhere in between. Like most things, and like most theories, this truth is somewhere in between. Now I'm going to quote to you a saying of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. It's a saying number 78 from Nahj al-Balagha, in which he discusses this at great length. And I think he provides a wonderful explanation for us that we can apply in our day-to-day lives. And hopefully some of the misconceptions that we have can clear. So the Imam was returning from a battle, and a Syrian inquired the Imam. He said, were we destined to fight the army of Mahdia? Was it Qadr? Were we destined? The Imam gave a very detailed response. Nahj al-Balagha just contains a summary and part of that response, the key part of that response, but he gave a very detailed response as to what his position was and what the genuine, true understanding should be. He starts out by saying, woe to you. Okay, so that tells you already that the questioner has got the wrong premise, has got the wrong starting assumption. Was this predetermined? Was this in our qismat, as we say? What was this our qadar, our destiny? Okay, so it's woe to you. You take it, and the Imam continues, you take it as final and unavoidable destiny. If it was so, there would have been no question of reward or punishment, and there would be no sense in Allah's promise or warnings. So if you say something is destined, it's going to happen, what is my role in that? I don't have a role in that. I'm destined to go from London to Birmingham. I'm destined. What is my effort in that? What is my contribution to that? Now here, as part of a clarification, there are certain things that you and I do that actually there is no reward for. We sleep, there is no reward. We eat because we need to eat, there is no reward. We drink because we need to drink, there is no reward. Why? Because we're doing it for ourselves. So there's no reward. Now, one of the very simplest ways of trying to understand this very deep and complex issue is there a reward attached to it, and how do we get that reward? Or is there a punishment attached to a certain action, and how do we get, how are we punished for that action? Okay, so Imam Ali is framing the discussion in that context, saying, think about it in terms of, is there a reward? Is there a punishment? And if it's predestined, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot justifiably give you the reward for that action. Okay, so there's certain actions we do, like sleeping, like eating, like drinking, there is no reward. But the smarter ones amongst you will say, hold on a minute, we heard that sleeping in Ramadan, there is a reward. We heard that not eating in Ramadan prevents punishment, and also on top of that, you get a reward for it. That's what the Holy Imam continues on that topic. He says, on the other hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala glorified has ordered people to act by free will and has cautioned them and refrained them from evil. So there are certain things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us. Now, you're free to choose to act according to His commandments. You're free to choose to act in accordance to His commandments. It's a real shame that I'm having to speak to a camera, because if you're in the audience, I'd see whether you understood it or not. But I'm assuming you're understanding the arguments here. Okay? So we are what Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam is saying is, think about, is there a reward or is there a punishment attached? And then think about whether we're free to choose that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the glorified, has ordered people to act by free will and has cautioned them and refrained them from evil. He has placed easy obligation on them and has not put heavy obligations. He gives them much reward in return for very little action. He gives them much reward in return for very little action. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put certain obligations, certain things are wajib, certain things are mustahab, certain things are mubah. There's neither a reward for it nor a punishment. We can do it. We can eat, sleep, drink. But we can't do that. We can't eat and drink during daylight hours in Ramadan. All of a sudden punishment comes in. There are certain things He's told us to stay away from, makruh. And certain things He's told us are haram. I will punish you for that. Makruh, I'm not happy with that, but you can do it. You should refrain from it, but you can do it. Okay? And then there's haram. So there's 5 categories. Mubah, the middle one, you can do it. It has neither good nor bad. So you're free to choose at that point. Okay? So always think of this in terms of, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us? What is the obligation on us? And when are we free just to choose whatever we want to choose? The choice is with us. And that's the crucial point that will keep coming out in this saying and khutbah from Amir al-Mu'mineen. He then continues, He has placed easy obligations on them and has not put heavy obligations. So if you think about the commandments of Islam, of the Sharia, they're relatively easy. Even the 5 prayers have become so easy when we can combine 2 sets. Zuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha, we can combine. The rules are you can combine them. So effectively 3 times we have to remember to pray. I mean, how complex, how difficult is that? How much of a challenge is that for us? It's not really, is it? Okay? But the reward is great. The reward is paradise. If your salah is accepted, then all the other amals will be accepted. So how wonderful, for such small action on our side, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us eternity in paradise. That's what Amir al-Mu'mineen is referring to here. He is disobeyed not because he is overpowered. He is obeyed but not under force. He did not send prophets just for fun. He did not send the book for the people without purpose. He did not create the skies and the earth and all that is in it and between them in vain. So our disobedience to Allah is not us showing that we're more powerful from Allah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our obeying Him is not showing us that we're compelled. We are free. And this is the crucial point. We are free. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, these are things I want you to do. These are things I want you to stay away from. These are things I want you to do. These are the things I want you to stay away from. Okay? That's really important. There are rules. Whilst we are free, he has applied certain rules, the Sharia, on us. And he's saying, abide by them, and I will reward you. Resist what I've told you not to do, and I will reward you. But go against them, I will punish you. Okay? So at this point, the man asks, so what was our qadr? What was our destiny? And Imam responded, he's saying that our destiny was Allah's command. Allah commanded us to go and fight them. So we went and we fulfilled our obligation. And we will get rewarded for that. We were not predestined in any way. There was a command. There was an army marching against the Muslims. Okay? We had to go and fight them. That was an obligation on us to go and defend the Muslims against the invading army of Muawiyah. So we had to go and fight them. That was the obligation at the time, and therefore there will be a reward for it. But it wasn't predestined, predetermined. We see that the Imams many times, even on the on the plains of Ashura in Karbala, Imam Hussein, on the battle was originally planned for the 9th of Muharram. The Imam Hussein asked for another day from the other army. He said, I'll give you time to consider. You've still got time to pull back. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? So the Imams always gave the opportunity to the other side to repent, to think about what they were doing. Just as you and I still have that opportunity. Do not think if you're in a difficult position that is it, that is God has predetermined, that is your destiny. You can still strive to come out of that. The challenge is to remain firm in your faith. The challenge is to face the trial that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put all believers through. And that's a topic for another day. But we will all be put through a trial. The question is how we come out the other side. As a brother recently described to me, he says, anyone who goes through a trial, it's like coal. Coal, when it's condensed and squashed and squeezed, eventually it becomes a diamond. But to become that diamond, you would have to have gone through that pressure and to have come out the other side. The question for us is, as we're going through difficult times, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make anyone who's going through a difficult time, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ease their difficulty, is how strong we remain with our faith, how committed we remain with our faith. Are we truly then, that is our test for us. Do we still adhere to the wajibats, or do we abandon our salah because we're going through a difficult time? We forget that we have to remember Allah five times a day because we're going through a difficult time. The only thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I've given you certain commands, but I've given you free choice. Go on, you can do them, or you can not do them. Turn to me, I will help you. But I will trial you. You will have a test during your life. Some people have multiple tests because they're the closest to Allah. If you really want to come close to Allah, expect the tests, expect the trials. But it's how we react during those. That really determines our status in the hereafter. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam at this point finishes by quoting a verse of the Holy Quran, Surah number Sa'd, Surah Sa'd, Surah number 38, verse number 27. He doesn't quote the full, but I will just recite the full for the sawab that we will get from it. وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاءَ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا بَاطِلًا ذَلِكَ الظَّنُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَوَيْلٌ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنَ النَّارِ. And we did not create the heaven and the earth and what is between them in vain. That is the opinion of those who disbelieve. then woe to those who disbelieve on account of the fire. You think that we've all been predetermined, predestined? This is it. Everything's already written down for us. This is what we're going to do. It's written in the stars, as some people say. No. What's the point of heaven and earth then? What is the point of Jannah and Jahannam? What is the point of Day of Judgment? So this idea, this notion of freedom, from an Islamic perspective, notion of freedom is closely linked to the notion of adalat. Okay, and that's why we have this as a standalone part of our faith. Okay, so the whole part of our faith, Tawheed, Adalat, Nubuwwat, Imamat, Qiyamat. The core beliefs are Tawheed and Qiyamat. Okay, but we've added Adalat to clarify and to make sure that as the youngsters amongst you, as you're growing up, and that you understand this concept, because this distinguishes from the other members of the wider Islamic groups. Adalat, Nubuwwat, prophethood, and linked to that is Imamat. Okay, but the core elements of entering into the folds of Islam is La ilaha illallah, is Tawheed. But we've added Adalat to clarify, hold on a minute, God, this God, the God that we believe in is a just God. And linked to that is the freedom. He has given us freedom, but he's imposed on us certain obligations. The question is, are we going to adhere and are we going to fulfill those obligations? And this verse of the Holy Quran, that's what it is. Is this in vain? Why would he create heaven and hell if he's not going to judge us? And if he is going to judge us, what's the criteria he's going to judge us on? And if we were compelled, if we were forced to do the actions that we do, if we are forced into the circumstances that we are in, then hold on a minute, what is the point of punishment and reward in the hereafter? My dear brothers and sisters, this hopefully provides a summary. As I said, it would be nice to have had a few faces around me to see if you'd understood it, and I could possibly have gone in and given a few more examples. But inshallah, I hope that the ideas have come through. So this discusses freedom and hopefully addresses some of the baggage that we've come with from the Indian subcontinent, this whole idea of qismat. Qismat this, qismat that. No, you're here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has imposed certain obligations as you must fulfill those obligations. The rest is up to you. But remember, there will be trials and tribulations. Anyone on the Sirat al-Mustaqim will face trials and tribulations. But it's really down to you as individuals. It's up to you to make the best of this life. It's a blessing. As Imam Hussein said in Dua Arafat, it's a blessing. You remembered me when no one remembered me. You knew of me when no one else knew of me. And then you put me here so that other people could recognize me. It's a blessing. It's a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted you life and has granted you free will and has granted you the opportunity to independently and freely worship Him. I'm going to finish off with a story, and again, this will hopefully clarify a little bit about free will and making personal choices. The story is that of Hazrat Yusuf alayhi salam. Hazrat Yusuf alayhi salam was thrown into a well by his brothers, was picked up by a caravan, was sold as a slave. And we'll come on to the topic of slavery either tomorrow or the day after. Was sold into slavery. He was then bought in the markets in Egypt and taken into a household. Hazrat Yusuf was faced with a very difficult choice. Hazrat Yusuf was faced with a very difficult choice. He was faced with a choice of committing a sin, and he's a prophet, so he can't do that. But from a lesson from us, he was faced with a sinful act, or to end up in prison. Now, what could be worse? What do we think of as the worst possible place to be? Is imprisoned. He willfully chose the prison to avoid the sin. So Hadrat Yusuf alayhi salam ended up in prison to protect him from a sinful society that he was in, okay, and protect him from his masters. And we'll come on and we'll discuss it. We won't have time today. We'll come and we'll discuss Ayatollah Shaykh Bakr al-Sadr's viewpoints on freedom, personal freedom and social freedom. And this is a story that he relates in his work. Okay. It says, so Hazrat Yusuf is now in prison. Okay, give you some context. He's freely, willingly ended up in prison to avoid being in a state, in a position where possibly there is a possibility that a sin may be committed. Okay, I know there's young children listening, so I'm being very delicate with my words here. Okay, but to protect his isma, to protect his himself from what was around him at the time. So what could be worse in our eyes is being in prison. He's saying, I will go to prison to stay away from the problems of the world, of the society that I'm living in. We see a lot of people making sacrifices. Nelson Mandela comes to mind straight away. He went to prison, remained in prison for a very long time. When he came out, he was very humble about the experience. You know, even today, we have examples of people. They don't have to be Muslim, but there are examples of people who stand up for their principles, sacrifice their own liberty and freedom for those principles. And when they finally get them, they're very humble, very forgiving about the people that did that to them. Anyway, coming back to Hazrat Yusuf's story. So he is in prison. In prison, he gives a wonderful argument for personal freedom. And I said, we'll discuss this in much more detail tomorrow. Okay. Ya sahib as-sijn al-arbab al-mutafarriqun khayrun am Allah al-wahid al-qahhar. Oh, my two mates of the prison, are sundry lords or more than one lords better than one Allah, the Supreme? So he's sitting in prison and yet he's still doing tabligh. And he's preaching to his the fellow inmates, and he's telling them, listen, are there multiple lords better, or is a single Lord better? See, the personal freedom in Islam is the freedom to be independent of any obligation to other people other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I said we'll develop it tomorrow because time is limited today. Is to have that freedom not to be obliged, not to be confined, not to be under the yoke or under the control of someone else. So when Hazrat Yusuf puts this argument first, he says, you can have multiple lords, gods, masters, or you can have the one. When you get rid of all these other masters, all these other rulers, all these other obligations, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, life becomes a lot easier. Life becomes a lot easier. We have to be very, very careful about what it is that's dragging us down. So this is in a Western context. What are we obliging ourselves? Remember, to enter the fold of Islam is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. La means there is nothing. La ilaha, there is no God. But God, not just whether you're talking about idols, whether you're talking about crosses, whatever you think of God, let's take this beyond that. What we're referring to here is not just God in that sense, but God in the sense of any other thing that makes you obliged to do certain things. Whether they control you economically, whether they control you emotionally, whether they control you spiritually. The moment you free yourself from those chains, then it doesn't matter whether you're actually in chains or in prison, because your focus is towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's saying, my worship is to you, I am totally devoted to you, and I'm only worried about my obligations to you. No longer do I feel the pressure of other people. And that's an emotional and a spiritual freedom that you get from entering the folds of Islam, genuinely entering the folds of Islam. In Surah Araf, the Quran clarifies further. It says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ عِبَادٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ فَادْعُوهُمْ فَلَا يَسْتَجِيبُ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Surely those whom you call on besides Allah are in a state of subjugation like yourselves. Therefore call on them, then let them answer if you're truthful. Careful who we attach ourselves to. Let's be careful about who we attach ourselves. This cannot only happen if I go to this person, or I go to this institution, or I get this much money. All of a sudden, money becomes your God, your objective. You will sacrifice your salah, you'll sacrifice your psalm, you'll sacrifice your hajj, you'll sacrifice your family, you'll sacrifice yourself to obtain that, because that's become your goal. That's become your goal. So to have these multiple goals, or have these multiple objectives, which are temporal, which are limited to this world, they tie your personal freedom. They tie your personal freedom. You're no longer free. You're no longer free. You're no longer obliged. You're no longer free and focused on the true teachings of Islam. You are no longer free. You now have two gods. Money is one. The wealth that you need to acquire, the target that you have in mind, that becomes your goal, and you'll make sacrifices from the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this duality that we've introduced ourselves into our lives means that we're no longer free. Inshallah, brothers and sisters, we'll continue this topic of personal freedom and what it means from a Western perspective. So what we discussed today was from an Eastern perspective, getting rid of this idea of qadr and qismat. Yes, to clearly remove those ideas. But inshallah, tomorrow we'll talk about what does it genuinely mean to be free in a Western society? What does that mean? What is that obligation? We find that Imam Hussein and his companions were genuinely free. Zuhair ibn Kayn, free. He gave everything up. He divorced his wife. He said, fine, I'm free. I'm going to die. I release you. Hur, on the night of Ashura. On the night of Ashura. On the day of Ashura, apologies. On the day of Ashura, he's between heaven and hell. And he chooses the path of what? Chooses the path of freedom. Hur means free. Hur means free. He chooses that path willingly. My dear brothers and sisters, let us think ourselves. Let us think about that. Let us think what it is that is tying us down. And inshallah, tomorrow we'll discuss this in greater depth. What, especially in the Western society, what things tie us down, become our obligations, become our Rabb. We don't even know it sometimes, and they become our Rabb. They become the predominant thing that goes on in our minds, in our hearts all of the time. And how do we remove them, those obstacles, so that we can focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I will leave you with those thoughts, inshallah, and we'll continue the discussion tomorrow. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.